Good morning and welcome to Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter on WSOU 89.5 FM and streaming at WSOU.net. So today we're going to talk about today's organizations are facing one of the most consequential leadership challenges of our time. And it's not technology, it's not talent shortages, but how leaders adapt to a workforce that is no longer defined by a single place or a single way of working. Hybrid work has evolved from an experiment to an expectation. Yet, many leaders are discovering that flexibility alone is not enough. What's required is a fundamental shift in how we lead, how we measure performance, build trust, and sustain culture. My guest today is Brent Eugenides.
Eugenides.
Eugenides, thank you. Thank you. Eugenides. He is author of The Hybrid Solution. Brent challenges the conventional wisdom around hybrid work. It makes a compelling case that is not a policy problem, it is a leadership test. His work focuses on how executives and organizations must rethink accountability, communication, and culture to succeed in a hybrid world. We're going to explore what leaders are getting wrong and what they must unlearn and what it truly takes to build a high performing organization in this new reality. Brent, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
This is such a dynamic topic. And first of all, what prompted you to write this particular book?
I guess it came really it goes way back to when I worked with my father, and he was an old school mortgage banker type of guy. I came out of business school, worked for him. We had old processes in place, which, had been tested by the test of time, and everything worked quite well. But, things moved along, became an outdated organization. A lot of disruption in the industry in the early 90s, late 80s. And then I moved into, consulting with other businesses. I got into the financial planning, financial services area, and I worked mostly with privately held businesses,
Okay.
smaller organizations, and companies that tend to have, everybody's sort of wearing more than one hat, And so the whole hybrid idea just sort of, came out of that. It was before the days of Zoom and Teams and, all the things that we use today, every day. But it was clear to me that you have to adapt and be quick. And so the hybrid term is kind of the one that I've just sort of latched onto.
Okay. All right. So when people hear hybrid work, they often think about remote versus in-office days.
Right.
How
Right.
do you define hybrid and the hybrid solution, and how is your definition different from the popular conversation?
Yeah, for me, hybrid isn't really the hybrid work environment thing as we typically see it explained or used commonly. To me, hybrid is more of a directional tool that the business owners need to use to create a hybrid approach to how they manage their business in terms of fundamentally, most entrepreneurs are in the business to grow their wealth through the expansion of their business.
Hmm.
But the business tends to take over all their decision making, and the personal stuff gets sort of put in the corner. And it's true for kind of all the other people that work in businesses as well. And my solution or my approach is the hybrid approach is really to try to merge those two, your personal goals as well as your business goals, and have a better decision making process in as an end result.
Okay. And so, what are some of the common misconceptions leaders have about hybrid work?
I think they tend to think it, it's really not necessary, to think in a hybrid way. They just sort of been doing things the way they've been doing them. Most of my clients are not young startup types. They're middle age,
Mm-hmm.
50s plus,
Mm-hmm.
and they built their business through a lot of sweat equity, frankly, and they built it and they've got relationships and they're building their team around the way they do things. And they're not necessarily looking at their personal side of it at all. And they're just feeling that, we're just going to run this business. And I've done it this way. I've been successful so far. Usually when I meet them, they're already relatively successful. And so it's just a matter of sort of breaking down the walls of, well, where are you headed? What's your really end game? What do you want the business to deliver to you on your personal side? And let's hybrid that decision making. So it's more of a decision making approach rather than just sort of how we work together using technology as a hybrid tool.
Mm. So, in your opinion, is hybrid work primarily a cultural challenge, a leadership challenge, or operational one?
I think it's a little of all those, but mostly it's a leadership challenge. I think getting people to adopt a way of working that is aligned with their personal goals. Typically, a small family-run business, whoever is at the top, the parents or the grandparents, you're sort of running the show, and the kids are just kind of waiting for their turn. And I find it's not very effective to do that. It's more effective to sort of let's have the family unit kind
Mm.
of pull together and let's work. What is our succession plan? What are we planning to do with this business? Maybe it is pass it on to the next generation. Maybe it's not. There's usually a dysfunction there between siblings. Some siblings are maybe not in the business with the others. So you have to adopt sort of a hybrid approach to how you run the business and the decisions that you make.
Okay. And so, but why do so many hybrid initiatives fail even when leaders believe they are being flexible?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think change is hard.
Mhm.
Hybrid sort of, just took a shot in the arm because of the whole COVID crisis. Everyone had to immediately adopt
Right.
hybrid working. But to me, that's secondary. It's really the hybrid mindset. Hybrid meaning not necessarily how we're going to connect and how we're going to communicate, but how we're going to think about the organization. What do we want this thing to do for us? It's not just making widgets. There's more to it than that. You have to go deeper, and there's usually conflicting interests that has to be worked out amongst the team so that everybody is working in a fashion that's delivering for the business, of course, but also for their personal goals. And I think the personal goals get pushed off to the side oftentimes.
And so what are some of the best practices that a manager should leverage and utilize in this hybrid work environment?
They should leverage the talent within more than they do. Uh, there's always sort of a push and pull, but usually the decisions are being made too much kind of at the top with not enough delegated,
Hmm.
letting people kind of run with things, too
Right.
much micromanaging. And to me, hybrid is it should be as flat of an organization as possible. You've got the technology to certainly be able to patch people together easily. So let's let them run with these things and delegate and give them the power to improve their particular functions, their particular processes, their particular departments. And good ideas come from those that are doing the work, not necessarily people sitting in the corner, uh, counting the beans.
So you argue that hybrid work requires a different leadership mindset.
Yeah.
Specifically, must leaders unlearn from traditional management models?
So much of the management culture comes out of the 50s, it comes out of,
Oh, yeah.
sort of the IBM school of business or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And it's still there and it's still ingrained in a lot of the coaching, a lot of the the techniques that you see. When I first got out of the mortgage business and I started to work for a big insurance corporation, it was really like I had just stepped back in time, the way they had the organizational structure set, and you couldn't really make much effort. You couldn't change things. You either do it the way they say you do it, or you get out.
Right.
And that exists still today,
Mhm.
even in the small organizations. Somebody who started the business probably didn't start the business from scratch at 20. They worked for somebody else first, and they
Mhm.
sort of adopted those things, and it just becomes ingrained in the way you think. And you kind of have to really step back and think outside of the traditional 1950s culture, and how businesses typically are still working today. I mean, oftentimes they're still operating the same way as they have for 30 years.
What within your book, what does it suggest that a manager should do to self-reflect on their style and what should they consider to do differently?
Uh, what we do is we actually go into a fairly deep sort of personal values level discussion with the owners of the business, and we start there.
Mhm.
Nothing's going to happen until the leaders adopt the change, right? You can't expect anything to happen without that. So they have to first adopt the fact that, what are going to be the values within our own personal goals?
Right.
What do we want this business to deliver for us personally? And then how are we going to make decisions in the business that reflect those goals down through,
Hmm.
the organization. Now, I don't typically work with large companies.
Hmm.
So mostly it's the executive team, which is usually the owner, co-owners, and a CFO possibly. Sometimes they don't even have a CFO. They're not that large. They might have CPA or other advisors that are sort of part of their team, but they're not really part of the organization. So it's fairly easy for us to sort of, once we get the values straight with the owners, then it's a matter of establishing that, with the other people inside the business, which might be, typical size business we work with is under 20 employees.
Okay. And so, how should executives rethink trust, accountability, and performance measurement in this hybrid environments?
So the performance measures for us, for most of these owners, is based off of their exit strategy, where they want to go and when they want to get there. It's usually there's some sort of a transition. Now that transition could be to the next generation, or it could be a sale, some sort of a retirement uh, goal.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's the metric. We're usually working backwards towards. We take their personal financial plan that's built out with goals and with a deep understanding of really what's important to them about money, which sounds like a simple question to ask, but you actually, when you start to pull it back, what's important about money goes pretty deep into all sorts of other things. What are you going to do with the money that once you make it? It's not just retirement living, it's maybe charitable things, taking care of family members, whatever it might be. So that is kind of where we first want to focus, to find out what's that end game, if you will, and then work backwards and make sure that that is being served by the business rather than the business just taking over and running your life.
Do you find that when the owner of a company is in that mode to say, I'm getting ready to transition out, um, what are the recommendations that you make to them to ensure that the employees won't feel like they're being left out, feel like
Right,
they need to move on, feel like they're not
right,
being considered to be the new owner.
right,
Um,
right. That's a tricky path,
mhm.
and you have to engage everybody. You can't just have meetings off-site about the transition. Everyone has to know we're in this together, and everyone's interests. are as aligned as possible. Now,
Hmm.
that's not always perfectly achievable. Usually, the business owner's specific personal situation is going to be the end result of some of the decisions. That's just fact of life.
Right.
But oftentimes, what I do see is they're not starting early enough to start to keep that conversation, to get it out there on the table and start talking about where are we headed and start delegating as much as you can, as early as you can, authority and decision making to others. From that process, usually one or two people will sort of surface as being the most obvious next line, heir apparent, whatever you might call it.
Right.
And then it's just sort of kind of with a small organization tends to sort of just take over its own momentum.
Hmm.
Some people aren't interested, frankly, in taking on that entrepreneurial risk chair. Somebody usually surfaces it was I usually see. That's typically
Okay.
what happens.
Okay. So one concern that I learned through your book is that you often hear that hybrid work erodes the culture. So based on your research and experience, what actually builds culture in a hybrid organization?
What typically will build culture is when everyone understands better what their personal reason for being there is.
Hmm.
I mean, obviously, maybe a rank and file person who's just coming in is looking for a paycheck, you know, they haven't really got to the point where they have the resources to be able to think beyond just sort of, making it through paycheck to paycheck. But once you get past that and they start to build a little bit of wealth,
Hmm.
then it's a matter of understanding different people have different cultural needs, I guess you might call it. They have different reasons for being there, and they're not always the same. You need to understand that and put people in the right roles that allow them to thrive as best as possible. Again, it's harder with a smaller business. You don't have a bunch of departments where you can sort of isolate people. So
Mm.
there's a lot of cross training, and the cross training allows people to share their own personal
Right.
viewpoints on things, and that's the part where it kind of really gets very interesting.
Very nice. Very nice. And so, how should leaders rethink meetings, communication norms, and collaboration to avoid creating first class and second class employees?
It's almost impossible not to have some sort of striation in there within the organization. There's going to be sort of the doers and the followers.
Hmm.
It's kind of the human condition in a lot of ways. But you can still give everybody the authority to be better at what they do.
Right.
And you give them that mostly through trusting them and delegating and letting them know that you're not going to be micromanaging, looking over their shoulder, and you're going to let them take what they do and try to improve it. And you'd be surprised that the best ideas sometimes come out of, the people pushing the paper or whatever.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
So, can you, with our audience, can you share a real world example of an organization that implemented a hybrid model well, and if they did it, and what did they do differently?
Yeah. So I have an engineering firm. They do waterfront coastal engineering, docks and
Hmm.
uh, erosion stuff and marinas and things like that. And, the primary owner started to delegate more and more after we started working to some of his team members. Uh, he has a group of about 20 people that work for him. There were three people that sort of surfaced that wanted to take on a larger role. So it was kind of tough for him in the beginning to not make all the decisions as he had been. But he started to little by little just let go of those things. And over time, uh, a number of good things came out of that. The things that just operational things, the way they managed the team, the
Hmm.
way they put together some of the engineering studies changed. Uh, they weren't always doing it the same way as he had always done it. So it just evolved over time. He wanted to exit in 9 years. This was 3 years ago. So now we're so-called 6 years into his timeline, but
Mhm.
we've moved it forward just through being able to execute better. He's been able to decrease his timeline. The timeline metric for him was he just wanted to reach kind of a certain level of value of the business so that he could transition it out. He
Okay.
wasn't sure if he was going to sell it or not. Three of the people want to buy in. So that's in the process of trying to figure out exactly how equity can be earned in the business.
Hmm.
They don't necessarily have just the money to buy them out. They're going to have to sort of earn their way into it. So we're doing sort of a modified ESOP. ESOP
Okay.
is something that's used for
Oh, yeah.
large companies. This is much smaller than that, but it's the same kind of idea. As they're going to be earning it into a pool, and that pool ultimately is going to be something that's going to be used to help pay him out over time. But he never thought that he would, be able to transition the business internally. He was always thinking someday I'm just going to have to sell to the big guys, and hopefully I get a good price. That's kind of when we met him. That was his frame of mind.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
So when we think about strategy and ROI, beyond employee satisfaction, what is the real business case for getting hybrid to work right?
What is the what was the question?
The real business case.
The real business case. To me, it's viability of the actual value of the business. There are a lot of businesses, over 80%, if you look at different studies, that just close up when the guy retires, or it doesn't, it just sort of it plateaus and then it starts to lose market share and somebody else comes along and, uh, you know, they just they don't ever have a transition. They just sort of end up in default. So the business case for me is if you're growing value, you've got a sustainable thing that you're continuing to grow. You've got 80% chance of not being the 80% that don't make it.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah. So
And
to me, the business case is really just about
Mhm.
the sweat equity, if you will, people put into their business.
Right,
You don't necessarily have any equity in that business unless you plan for
right. So how oftentimes, like give you example,
it. Yeah,
um, I've seen businesses where the owner is the asset.
right. Big problem.
How, in your recommendation, how can a owner first of all realize that, and what steps should they take to create the value outside of themselves so that the purchaser sees, oh, I'm gonna buy this business and it has
Right.
this value. And if the owner hangs around for a couple of months, that's okay. But once they go, the business is strong.
Right. That is probably one of the key components of the work that we're trying to do is get people out of that the business revolves around you kind of a situation. A business that revolves around you isn't worth much if you're not there. It's not transferable.
Right.
So you have to delegate, you have to train. That's the hybrid idea is you really are trying to get to the point where you can go on a 2 month vacation and not make any decisions. And when you come back, the business is doing fine.
The keys still work in the door. Yes.
Right. When you talk to the business owner, well, I'm on vacation. Yeah, but I make all the decisions while I'm on vacation. Like, that's good. It's like, that's not good. You need to actually be able to not be there. And it needs to, so that's a different mindset because there's ego involved typically. Most entrepreneurs have pretty good size egos, as I've seen. And you have to get them past that point of it doesn't revolve around you. The less it revolves around you, the better. More sustainable, if you will, the more repeatable revenue streams that you can build into the business. That also helps. And those are usually the two big things that
Okay.
I see.
And so when you think about how does an effective hybrid model impact productivity, talent retention, innovation, or even customer outcomes?
All of those things. It's a boost to every one of those areas.
Mhm.
There's no question about it. You can't be improving your systems and your processes without ideas, if you will, from the rank and file up to the top.
Mhm.
It just doesn't happen. It stagnates, and most business owners realize it too late. There's not enough runway left to be able to make the change, even if they can change.
Right.
They get disintermediated. There's a tremendous amount of disruption for the technology, of course, depending on the type of business that you're in. Um, you really need to be growing at a fast clip all the way through, particularly those last 5 years, because that's where the buyers are going to be looking. Well, what are you doing? Not how well you were 10 years ago. Maybe you used to be successful, but now it's slowed down and it's sort of a plateau and there's really no growth.
Right.
Nobody wants to buy that business.
So if a CEO that you're dealing with is skeptical about hybrid work, what
Right.
data or argument tends to resonate with them the most?
Usually it's where do you want to end up? And they usually have a number in mind, back of the envelope of what they think their business is worth. So not to be too insulting, but we usually ask them for the data, the financials, and let's just see if you were to put this on the market today, what's it worth? And
Right.
you know, ask a few business brokers and some of the small private equity, whatever, you can come up with a pretty good number of what, and half the time, I would say at least half the time, it's not sellable.
Right. Right.
So it's like you come back to them and say, this really isn't sellable. Well, I know it's worth X. I've got all this going on. Then you just have to sort of work it through. And that's difficult. They don't want to accept it usually at the beginning.
That's a chilling factor,
It
certainly.
is. It is. Um,
So,
I-
unfortunately, our time is dwindling down, believe it or
yeah,
not. This has
right.
been great. But if you could give leaders just one or two non-negotiable principles from the hybrid solution, what would they be?
Start with the end in mind. It's never too early, really, to start thinking about that exit date or that freedom point or whatever term you want to use, a point when you're no longer there and you're out of that business and you're on with the rest of your life. Think,
Mhm.
establish what that should look like, and then embed that into your personal goals, and then
Mhm.
work backwards.
Okay.
And if you start sooner, you have more time. If you wait, it's just that much more difficult to climb the mountain. What's probably going to happen is you won't get to where you want to be. You just don't have the time to get there.
Right. Right. So, Brent, this has been a great conversation. The hybrid solution offers a thoughtful and practical framework for leaders navigating one of the most important workplace shifts of our time. Where can our listeners learn more about your work and get a copy of your book?
So our website is befinancialllc.com. The book is available on Amazon, of course. I think Barnes and Noble, but Amazon's probably the quickest, easy way. If you just really typed in my name, hybrid solution, it'll pop right up.
Beautiful, beautiful. And ladies and gentlemen, we are here with Mr. Brent Eugenides.
Eugenides.
Eugenides. Brent, I'll get it right. Eugenides, the author of The Hybrid Solution. Brent, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
That wraps it up this week on Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter on WSOU 89.5 FM. And remember, streaming on the net. And also, if you have missed this, you can catch it on YouTube as well as on any podcasts. So at the end of the day, we always want you to remember that leadership, it begins with you.